Okay, we're recording.
Great. All right. Welcome again, everybody. Welcome to Permaculture 101, Resilient and Regenerative Design. So my name is Kelsey and I'm from Reforest London, and I'll just be kind of the host or moderator today. And then we're joined by Jessica Robertson from Wild Craft Permaculture, and she will be our host. So thank you so much to Jessica for being here. Oh, great. We're up to, I guess, 22 people. So good number. And then there's about 70 some signed up, so hopefully a few more pop in, but thank you for sharing your Saturday afternoon with us. This is a repeat actually of a webinar that Jessica led in June, and so it's been popular and I got to watch it the first time and it was really informative. So I know I can speak from experience and say that it's a really good one and you'll learn a lot from it. So thanks for coming. So this is hosted and supported by Reforest London. So I'm the Signal Boost Coordinator with Reforest London. And if you're not familiar with us, we're a local London-based tree planting charity. And a lot of people know us for the tree planting, but we're also the founders of the new Westminster Pond Center for Environment and Sustainability, which will be a hub for environmental events and programming. And so as part of that, we want to hold a lot of educational events. And so we're doing that under the umbrella of the new Signal Boost initiative. And so eventually there will be a lot of events held at that center. But in the meantime, during all this craziness with the pandemic, we're doing a lot of webinars instead, which is actually great because we can reach a lot of people. And so we're happy to have you here today. So that's about it for me. And here now I'll pass it over. And maybe towards the beginning, maybe you could do that poll of how many people are watching and where are you watching from?
Right. So, and yeah, Kelsey addressed this already. If you have any questions, put them into the chat box. And please remain muted. We are going to have a couple of polls as we go through. I'm just going to wait a little bit on that. I'm just nursing my 4-month-old because he didn't quite get finished before we started the webinar. So I'm going to wait till he's gone before I put the polls up. Welcome everybody to Permaculture 101. This is going to be a brief intro. If you really like what you hear and you want to go further in depth into it, on October 3rd, there's going to be a full day workshop with Reforest London again. So it's also free to attend. We're not sure, well, yeah, I guess the rules are changing right now about gatherings. So we'll see what they're like in October. Likely they'll probably stay what they are now. So as of the new changes this morning. So we'll have to see how many people we can host at that one. And it might depend on the weather a bit as well. In the summer, we held it outside, which was great. But in October, who knows what the weather's going to be like. So if we have to do it indoors, it'll be limited space. But so today, we'll start with the primary directive of permaculture. And really what drew me towards it is that it's about taking responsibility for your own existence and getting your own house and garden in order before pointing fingers at other people about what they're not doing. I did a lot of sustainability work in different fields, and there was a lot of talking about stuff and not always getting to doing stuff. And permaculture is about just doing it and not necessarily waiting until it's perfect, but trying stuff out and just applying what you know at the time and trying to make things better. So I used to work for an architecture firm in Edmonton, and one of my colleagues used to bring me Dilbert cartoons all the time. So this was one of his that he left on my desk one morning. And the joke's really just about, you know, how it's about making other people sacrifice and not ourselves. Whereas permaculture looks at the world as though there's plenty of resources. There's enough resources to go around of what we truly need. And it's about thriving and allowing everybody else to thrive with you, and not having this scarcity mentality that pits one person against another. And that's where we have conflict arising. So the word permaculture was coined in the 70s by Bill Mollison, who and his grad student David Holmgren in Australia, and they were trying to find a system of agriculture that was going beyond organic agriculture, because a lot of organic agriculture was and still does follow the same kind of mentality as conventional agriculture, but just without the chemical inputs. And so they were looking at like a truly permanent system of agriculture with perennial crops and holistic systems. And then now it's kind of come to cover human culture as well. So developing a permanent human culture on this planet. And permaculture is applied to financial systems, and there's inner permaculture work that some people are doing, and you can apply it to your business. So it's definitely moved out of just agriculture, although many people think of it still as gardening or growing food. And the quickest, shortest definition I like to use is that it's designing like an ecosystem. So if we look at how ecosystems function, if you look at a forest, there's nobody fertilizing it or weeding it or watering it. It's a holistic system that takes care of itself, more or less, and goes through cycles for sure, but is productive and healthy. And so we want to design systems that are like that as well, that are productive, that are healthy and need very little inputs from us once they're established. Janine Benyus started the biomimicry movement, and permaculture and biomimicry have a lot in common. And what I really like this quote of hers, that after 3.8 billion years of research and development, failures are fossils, and what surrounds us is the secret to survival. So in biomimicry, they look to natural systems for design as well, but they look at things like how a spider spins its web, or how they create silk, and looking at that, those technological solutions that nature has come up with, and trying to apply them to human materials and human systems and design. So there's an ethical framework in permaculture that has 3 components at its base: earth care, people care, and fair share. Earth care is recognizing that the earth is the source of all life, and that it's our valuable home, and that we're part of it, not apart from it. So we often talk about nature and us, like versus us, or that we're separate from it somehow. And I think that's really the root of what's led us to the problems we're in right now, is that we have this mentality of nature's out there, and then there's human culture. And it needs to be all integrated. We need to see ourselves as one. And there are a lot of traditional cultures that still think that way, but the dominant culture has lost that connection. People care is about supporting each other and developing healthy societies. So it's, yes, start with your house and garden and get your own stuff in order. But then, whoop, okay, somebody's done. Pause for a second. Just gonna hand him off. He's tangled in the, okay. Thank you. Oh no, okay. Okay, that's easier. So, yeah, so people care is about working as a society to change things. So yeah, start with yourself, but then move out from there and try and help those around you to come to a healthy balance of sustainable living. And fair share is about limiting consumption. If you get into deeper permaculture, there's kind of different levels of resources, and some are renewable resources, some are finite, and there's actually many more levels than that in between. But so there are limited resources, so those need to be distributed and shared equitably and used wisely. So, oil is a very important resource, but it is limited. Should we be using it to drive vehicles around to get to and from work and school every day? Or should it be used for medical purposes, or, used for higher needs? So the principles, I divide my principles up a little differently than some people. David Holmgren, one of the generators of permaculture, he has 12 principles that are there. Most people teach those ones. And my co-teacher in the full day course, we kind of he uses that one. So that's what we'll talk about on the third. But I have the same ideas here. I've just rearranged them a little bit differently. So the way I see it is that there's principles of human attitude, so the way we approach a system or approach problems. And then there's principles of natural systems that are just irrefutable ways that natural systems work, and we need to operate in the same way. So principles of human attitude are things like observe, turn problems into solutions, obtain a yield, and that the biggest limit to abundance is creativity. So the first one, observe, is very important. It's tempting when we have a new property or a new, we've just learned about permaculture and we want to start applying everything, but really observing. What is recommended is to spend a year observing your site before working on it. And obviously when I'm working with clients, I do design for people around Southwestern Ontario, from urban lots to farms and acreages and public projects. And I don't have a year to sit around and watch somebody's property before I start design, but there are things that I can observe by gathering the right data, and you just hone your observation skills. So, but if it is your own property, really try and take that time to sit with it and learn from it before you start making decisions that are difficult to reverse. Turn problems into solutions. So I really like this one. It's partly about having a positive attitude about things instead of just being negative all the time. But it's also, so, instead of like you have a lot of slugs around your yard and they're eating your plants. Well, instead of a slug problem, maybe you have a duck deficiency and you need ducks, and then the slugs actually become input into something else in the system. And so that problem then becomes a solution to feed another element of your design and make it more of a closed loop. Obtain a yield. So when I started learning about plants, I was really only interested in plants that I could eat. And hostas meant nothing. I thought hostas were such a waste of space until I found out you could eat them. And then I was like, oh, great. I'm so glad we have hostas all over our new yard. So obtaining a yield is important, but yield doesn't necessarily mean food. Yield can be medicine, yield can be beauty and respite, yield can be animal fodder. If you're raising livestock or small animals, then a yield can be producing something that they can eat. Yield can be producing pollen and food to support a diverse ecosystem. So just to take that into note, that yield can mean many different things. And the biggest limit to abundance is creativity. So when we think we have a complete design or a complete system, there's always something else you can add or something you can tweak. And the systems evolve. Ecosystems are not static. We used to talk about the climax state ecosystems. That's an old term. Actually, now we talk about the dynamic equilibrium that is reached when an ecosystem is kind of at its most diverse. Well, it's not its most diverse actually, but when it is kind of a stable state, it's a dynamic equilibrium. So there's still always fluxes and changes happening. And so in our design systems as well, we want to be constantly modifying them to be more abundant and more self-sufficient and more complex. So principles of natural systems. Just let me check. Shoot. Sorry, I forgot I'm doing, there were some people in the waiting room. I forgot I'm the admin right now too. It's hard to do both at the same time. Okay. Sorry for the people I just let in. I got caught up talking and didn't notice that you were sitting in the waiting room. Okay, so I think that's everybody now. Principles of natural systems. And so, as I said, these are principles that you see in nature. They're the way natural systems work. And so this is where we're observing those and then taking that thinking and philosophy to applying it to how we design our systems. So connect is a big one. There's so many, I don't know if you ever played that game where you throw a ball of yarn back and forth and all the connections between the different animals or insects or plants in the ecosystem, and how you create this web. And it's just like the World Wide Web or our neurology. There's a million connections in natural systems. And so we want to create our systems to also have all these connections between the different elements in them. Catch and store energy and materials. So that can be about capturing water, energy, heat. Doesn't need to be photovoltaic energy, but heat energy, or materials like the leaves from the trees, mulch, but thinking about how to hold those in your system as long as possible before they leave, and how to reuse them multiple times before they leave your design system. The next two kind of go together. So each element performs multiple functions, and each function is supported by multiple elements. So say you, so we'll take water. So each element performs multiple functions. So you have a rain barrel that you're collecting rainwater in, and that water can be used to water the garden. It can also be used to wash your pots or your boots, like wash your gardening stuff. It can be used to fill a bird bath or a pond or something. And then each function is supported by multiple elements. So water is a very important function in any system. Water is life. So having multiple ways of accessing water on the site is very important. So that maybe you're capturing rainwater in a barrel. Maybe you're also capturing some directly into a swale. You've got a well or tap water that you can rely on. So you've got multiple ways of bringing that into your system. The next one is make the least change for the greatest effect. So small, simple solutions rather than big, grandiose movements is typically what we try and use in permaculture. I don't do a lot of installation work. I mostly do design work, but I think once maybe we've had machinery, and actually no, twice, but it's been the homeowners, the landowners. They're farmers. They have acreages, so they have little Kubotas and machines and stuff. So we've used machines a couple times, but because they had them and they wanted to, and they like their toys. But shovels are pretty easy to use, and you get a good workout too. So multiple yields, and then you're not, you don't need to be digging huge pits. Like a swale can be 1/2 foot or 1 foot deep to capture water and spread it out through your landscape. It doesn't need to be 5 feet deep. If it was 5 feet deep, you would probably want to use a machine to do it. But you try and think of small solutions that are human scale. And that goes with the next principle as well. Use small scale intensive systems. Optimize edges is one I really love as well, because if you look at like in biology, the edge of two ecosystems is where there's actually the greatest diversity. So in that old growth forest, there's actually not nearly as much diversity as there is along the edge of that old growth forest with a prairie or something, where you have two different systems, and then you have elements, you have animals and insects and plants from one and from the other, and that's where you have a lot going on. If you look at if you're stocking a pond, you can have the exact same volume of water in a circular pond, or you can have a second pond that has the exact same volume of water, but it has this kind of crenellated edge with a lot more edge, where you have the water meeting the land, and your fish stocking density is many times higher in that second pond, just because you have all that edge where life happens and where there's more diversity and there's more production happening, and then more food for your fish. Collaborate. Sorry, admitting another person there. So the last principle is collaborate with succession. So succession, for those who don't know, is how an ecosystem evolves over time. So if you have a fire go through, or a bulldozer or whatever, and kind of sets it to ground zero, succession is when those first plants come in, the weeds typically, and then and they'll kind of live there for a while, and then some shrubs will come in, and then the first trees would be poplar trees. And then they kind of prepare the ground and make way for other trees. So when we try and maintain a perfect turf lawn of just grass, one kind of grass and maybe a couple of kinds of grass, we're really holding back succession. In our part of the world, that's not what the system wants to be. It wants to be a complex forest system. And so if we're trying to maintain a lawn, there's a lot of work to keep all that extra life and diversity out. And so if we collaborate with succession and we try and design a system that is already at a mid or higher level succession, like a food forest, and we'll talk about food forests a little bit later, but if we try and mimic that forest system, we've got all these different layers happening, and it's a higher level of succession, and it will just be a calmer system to work with because it's not trying to fill gaps. Nature abhors a vacuum. It doesn't like having gaps. So anywhere there's empty space, it will fill it with something. If there's bare ground, you're going to do a lot of work to keep it bare. Whereas if you put something there that you want there, you're collaborating with succession. So I'm going to just, what's our next? Yeah, let's just pause for a second and see if there's any questions about, where's my chat? Oh, I see a bunch of questions, sorry. Can you, Kelsey, can you see the chat and moderate it as well, or?
So I do see the chat, but I only see things that were probably sent to everyone or to me. So if somebody sent something just to Jessica, I would not see that. So actually, if you don't mind, I'd prefer that you send it to everybody, or even to me, just so that Jessica doesn't need to be the only one watching both things at the same time. So I'm happy to see the questions and read them out loud, just so you guys know in the future.
So yeah, I think so. Yeah, they've all been sent to everyone so far, and they're not they're not questions yet. Okay, so if we want a healthy plant, just like how, to keep our bodies healthy, we need to eat healthy food. If we eat crap all the time, then our immune system's not going to be strong, and we're not going to be healthy, strong, vibrant people. So the same is true for plants. So we really want to start with the soil, and we're still learning a lot about the soil food web. There are, in 1 teaspoon of healthy bacteria, there are 1 billion bacteria with 20 to 30,000 different species in 1 teaspoon. So it's mind-boggling. And so there's a lot of knowledge that we still don't have about these systems. But what we do know is that healthy soil has billions of bacteria. That has several yards of fungal hyphae, thousands of protozoa, nematodes, macroorganisms. There's all sorts of life in there, and the more diverse the life in the soil, the healthier the soil is, and the healthier your plants are going to be. We talk about this a lot more in the fruit and nut tree care workshop that we've taught it twice already this year through Reforest London. We'll be teaching it again next year. So if you have, or you want to get fruit trees, I really recommend taking it, and we'll talk a lot more about this, how to boost the immune system of your plants and stuff. But the idea is that the basic idea is that the soil food web, it is a system, an ecosystem, and when we go in, when we till it and disturb it, we kill a lot of that life. And then there's this huge release of nutrients because those bodies of all those little organisms are storing nutrients in them. When we kill them, there's a big release of nutrients. And so we think we've got great soil, but then we need to keep adding fertilizers and nutrients because we've set back the population there. Whereas if we just let them follow out their life cycles and die naturally, they're going to constantly be releasing small amounts of nutrients. So that's why we want to try and focus on no-till gardening and organic practices that aren't killing the life that's in the soil. And I worked in Alberta for 4 years, and I did a keynote presentation for an Alberta agriculture conference and talked about soil being more important than oil. They were all agriculturalists, so they agreed with me, but it's a big thing to say in Alberta. But yeah, our civilization depends on healthy soil, really. And if when our soil isn't healthy, then it floats away too. It doesn't stay where it is. We lose tons of topsoil every year because of our current agricultural systems, and it just blows away in the wind or runs off in rain events because it's bare and it's lost its structure, its glue that holds it together. So patterns and observation, I talked about how observation is super important. That's like the first principle is observation. There are all sorts of patterns in nature that they repeat themselves over and over in natural systems because they are very useful for certain things, like web patterns, right? For distributing information and having resilient systems where there's lots of repeats of, if one line goes down, there's another way to get there through another part of the web. So learning those patterns and learning to apply them can be really helpful. And this is, usually we do this as an interactive exercise. It's a little harder to do when we're doing a webinar, but maybe we'll try it. So usually I would send people out to walk around for 5 or 10 minutes and to take observations and to use all your observation skills. Here we're just looking at a picture, but maybe after the webinar or tomorrow, if you have some time, go for a walk around your property and just spend some time observing and use all of your senses. So not just we're very visual, we rely a lot on our visual sense, but use your sense of smell and your sense of touch. What is where is the wind coming from? Is it strong, or is it stronger in some places and lighter in other places? Is it warmer in some places? Is it cooler in other places? Going out after a night like last night and observing frost and where frost has landed in your property and where it hasn't is really a really good observation. Going out in the rain and watching where water is coming from and where it's pooling and how it's flowing through the land can be really helpful. So and use your sense of smell. Did I say that one already? Anyways, use all of your senses when you're observing. So maybe if people have any ideas of things that they're observing in this picture here, what they see, and when we're observing, our primary observations are just about observing. We're not trying to think of why or postulate what's happening, just taking note of things. So go ahead and add to the chat if you have anything that you notice strongly from this picture. And I'm going to, while people are thinking about that, I'm going to find the polls and send one out. So there's a poll you can answer as well about whether you live in an urban or rural area, and then how much land you own, just to gauge sort of what amount of space people are working with.
So I'm watching the chat box and Michael says, beautiful location. Tamara says, are those apples on the ground or leaves?
They're dandelions.
Thought so.
Yeah, so I think everybody's voted. So 20% are urban. Sorry, 20 people. 87% are urban, 13% are rural. So 3 people on the webinar are rural. And yeah, pretty much everybody has less than half an acre, and then 1 person has more than an acre.
Tamara suggests if there's dandelions, maybe it's compacted soil.
Mm-hmm. So remember, at this stage, we're not trying to postulate why. We're just taking note of what we see. So I see dandelions clustered in one area. That's an observation. Dandelions mean compacted soil. That's a hypothesis as to why the dandelions might be clustered in one area. Yeah, people are seeing where there's shade, where there's not shade, that there's no garden. The very obvious thing of note in this picture is that there's this swath of dandelions here, and that there are dandelions scattered around here, but I'm sure they all go to seed every year. So, so then the question is, why are they in this area? And there might be several reasons for that, but first you're just doing the observing part. Tamara's right that dandelions mean compacted soil often. They can also mean that there's a lack of calcium in the soil. They can fix calcium. So if there's low calcium, it might be harder for other things to grow. And so they're going to fill that void that other plants are having a hard time living in. So we don't know why exactly. I mean, you can see that this is an old driveway because there's a garage there. So it likely there is compaction. But I'm trying to remember, we did an observation exercise at the in-person full-day workshop in the summer, and there was something that was the same thing. People jumped to the conclusion of why something was the way it was, and I can't remember. But it was and then we were like, well, you could think that that's why something is that way, but actually this was the real reason. I can't remember what it was now, but so it's very hard as humans. We want to solve problems. We want to see solutions. And so we start jumping to conclusions about why something is the way. But the first rule is just observe patterns, observe what you see and feel. And then you can go back and look at your data and cross-reference and make note of, okay, yes, there's a garage door here. And so probably this was a laneway and is now not anymore, is not being maintained. Oh, there's another person that just joined. Okay. Sorry, just reorganizing my screen here. So patterns and observation. Okay, whoops. So sentiment and bias are 2 interesting things that all humans have. So we all have sentiment and bias. It doesn't mean you have to throw them out the window, but you need to be aware of them. So, so like we have sentiments in the Western world towards flushing toilets and flushing toilets for some absurd reason with potable water, whereas in most parts of the world, you would never think to use potable water to flush shit away into the lakes and rivers that we get our water from. So, you know, we don't see our excrement as a resource the way we should. And there's tons of nutrients in that we're just getting rid of. And really that comes down to sentiment. It's what we've gotten used to. And I mean, the hoarding of toilet paper when COVID started was hilarious. You know, like, what did people do before we had toilet paper, before we invented turning trees into stuff to wipe our bums with? We used our hand and washed it after, or we used water. So, you know, some people got little bidet systems they could attach to their toilet. You've got potable water in there anyways. Why not just use it to rinse your bum after? We use cloth diapers for our kids, and we have cloth wipes, and they get washed. So, you know, make some rags, rip up an old bed sheet or towel and make some rags and have a little bin beside the toilet and then wash them. Most of us have washing machines in the house. So we're so committed to flushing toilets and using toilet paper that we can't let go of it, and we panic and beat each other up in the grocery store over it. So if you just can't let that go, then by all means work your design around that. There are also sometimes other reasons, like we're redoing a bathroom here, or putting in a bathroom on the main floor in the next little while, and we would love to have a composting toilet. And I'm almost had my husband convinced about it, but it's like $2,000 to get a good composting toilet model where we can just reuse the low flow toilet that we have already and relocate it. So, you know, there's always other factors involved as well. Maybe I'll build an outhouse one day, or a composting toilet outside. That's just like this system is a bucket system. So you just, if you're interested, read the book Humanure, and they just use a bucket system like this. That's all they have for their house. That was set up for our wedding, actually, at my mom's cottage. I was, trying to encourage people to use that versus the flushing toilet. And then bias. So bias against dandelions. We've been taught that this lawn, this perfect lawn with no weeds and no creeping Charlie and no clover and no dandelions is what we want for some reason. And whereas dandelions were brought to this continent on purpose by Europeans as a food source and a medicine, and now we don't want them around, but really they're actually delicious and very highly nutritious. So maybe we can change that bias towards them. Patterns and observation. And well, sorry, I'll just go back 1 second. I did go back. I mean, so bias and sentiment. So sometimes we can do things privately that we don't necessarily want to share with our neighbors either. Like I do some front yard designs for people, but typically people are more cautious about what is in their front yard because they want to have good relations with their neighbors, and they don't want their neighbors coming knocking on their door telling them that they don't like the weeds in their front yard or getting a fine from the city or whatever. And then in their backyard, they do things that are completely different. So we can kind of work around these societal sentiments and biases by just being discreet a little bit about what we're doing, and then slowly change things around. And what I've seen actually is once people do their front lawn, get rid of their lawn and plant it with food and berries and native plants and stuff, more often than not, it actually builds community. So you have people, you're out there working in the garden and your neighbors come by and you maybe haven't met yet, and you start up a conversation, share some berries with the neighborhood kids, and lo and behold, you're building community and meeting people that you haven't met even though you've lived there for 10 years. So generally good things come out of it. Why does it keep going backwards? Oh, poll time again. Okay. There. So this poll is just for us to get an idea of where people are watching from. The beauty of doing a webinar is that we can have 70-something people registered for it, and we can have people from all over southwestern Ontario joining instead of just people from London. Oh wow, we've actually got a lot of international people. Ooh, that's
awesome.
Exciting. Mm-hmm.
Wow, things are rolling in. I'm just thinking about my neighborhood where I think both you and I live in Old South, and there's just so many really elaborate front yards. So it's nice that in some neighborhoods, I guess it's become so popular to really design. And I think in a lot of cases, it's native plants. I'm not as much of the expert, but it's funny how it's taken off, and there's a lot of that sense of community, neighborhood community, where a lot of people are doing it.
And I think once one person does it, they then it gives more permission. People are like, oh, look what they did. Maybe I could do that too. And then they don't feel so sheepish about, they might have wanted to, but didn't want to because they thought the neighbors wouldn't like it. Like, so you kind of get the ball rolling, and then
add one or two things and make it discreet, and then add a little bit at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
So sorry, most people are from London. Not everybody's answered yet, but yeah, I think. Oh, somebody's from the UK. So yeah, we have 6 people watching internationally. Deep south coast of Ontario.
Reforest
Like,
London, we tend to get a lot of people who inquire and who are from the UK, and I think that's because London is in our name, and so a lot of people,
right.
you know, it pops up in their Google search, which is great. It means we have a pretty good, I forget what you called, but it comes up when you Google it. So that may be why.
I'll share the results here of the poll. So yeah, it's mostly people from, usually it's one person watching from the device. A few people have 2 people watching. Most people are from London, but yeah, 6 international, a couple from out of province, a couple from Southwestern Ontario, and then a couple from elsewhere in Ontario. We've got somebody from Florida, from Toronto, but moving to Portugal. Cool. I work with a group called United Designers that does permaculture design internationally, and they've got a project in Portugal. So if you get really into permaculture, maybe I can connect you with some people there. Smiths Falls, another Florida person, Philadelphia. Awesome, that's great. So zones are one of the ways we start breaking up a property when we're looking at designing it, and kind of helps organize, but also it's really based around how often you need to visit a place, like how often that part of your property needs visiting by you and needs tending by you, and versus stuff that doesn't need a lot of care, that is pretty self-sufficient. So zone 0 is your house, basically. Zone 1 is stuff around your house, and there's not these concentric rings. Like there might be a zone 1 that's out here a little bit because that's where the barn already exists and you're just going to have your chicken coop out there. But zone 1 is stuff that requires frequent visits for observation or work. So like a hen house, we need to collect the eggs every day and feed them. Seedlings that are going to need watering every day and care. Kitchen herbs, so you can just pop out your kitchen door and not have to walk back to the garden plot to get stuff for your dinner, if you just need some basil or something, because you're just not going to go get it. You're just going to take dried stuff from your cupboard instead of getting fresh. Zone 2 is stuff that's a little less intensively managed. Like you might have a vegetable garden in zone 1, but it's things like potted plants or tomatoes that need water every day, whereas main crop stuff like potatoes or squash or corn would be further out from the house, so that because they don't need as much care. And you could have an orchard in zone 2. Zone 3 might be, you could still have fruit trees and things out there, but they would be less, they would be ones that you don't need to prune as much, or maybe that's where your nut trees are. In an urban area, I know most of you are urban and don't have a lot of land. So you might not have all 5 zones. You might only have zone 1, 2 in an urban area, or maybe zone 1, 2, and 3. And then zone 4 and 5 can actually be like your community and be outside of your property boundary, but where you can still be gathering food from wild spaces. I used to teach a foraging walk every month, but there's sort of other people who've taken up the helm on that in London. So I don't do that as much anymore, but we certainly do forage for our own family. And then zone 5 is completely unmanaged natural spaces, like our environmentally sensitive areas, where you can just go and regenerate yourself, observe natural systems, observe what's growing with what, and how things are getting along there, and then applying that knowledge to to your own space. And just giving nature a place to be nature and not be too manipulated. So this is an example of a map I did for a client who obviously they're more homesteaders. They're out rurally, but so just to point out that here's the house is under this label here, under this zone 1. But so the zone 1 kind of is around the house, but then it's also around the road a little bit, and then also there's an on-site store where they sell like soaps and homemade products and things, and they're there every day for that. So that's part of their zone 1 because it's a daily need. And then zone 2 again is kind of scattered. So there's we designed an entryway here that has a lot of plants and that can be harvested and need a bit of care and maintenance to make it a nice entryway for the store. And then there's zone 2 beds here and here. And around here, there's going to be small livestock here that are going to need care, and tool shop and stuff. Zone 3 is the pasture. Zone 2-3 is kind of in between, is some food forest here that don't need too much care once they're set up. Whoops. And then this is natural area, zone 4 and 5, where they're going to maybe do some hunting and a bit of foraging, but not too. Sorry. When I move my mouse, it scrolls sometimes. What size was this design is a question. They have about 10 acres, I think, 9 or 10 acres. So yeah, that's just an example of how things don't need to be adjacent to each other or, concentric circles. You can have zone 2 pockets within a pocket of something else. So needs and yields. This is another good design tool in terms of figuring out how to place things in the environment. So, having things in proximity to each other so that the waste product of one thing can be the input for something else in the system. So often we use like a chicken scenario, but because we're mostly urban and chickens aren't allowed in London, Ontario, I'm not going to use that example. So I'm going to use an example of a raised bed. So some of the needs that a veggie bed has is that they need organic matter, obviously. They need some sort of disturbance or cultivation to get the seeds in the ground, or your seedlings in the ground. They need seedlings or seeds. They need mulch. They need water, sunlight. They need pollinators to make sure that you have production from your plants. They need some sort of edging to hold everything in. They need, they don't just need that organic matter in the soil, they need soil life. They need that soil food web to be healthy. They need freedom from pests and disease. And so when you're doing your chart, yeah, I think did we figure out how to do this? Yeah, right. So we could have yields, needs are things that the veggie bed needs. So needs are things like, can't see that color very well, mulch, water, soil. So you would like make a list of those needs, and then you make a list of your yields. So some of the yields are veggies, fruits. Sorry, writing with my mouse. Flowers, exercise, employment maybe. So you'd make a list of all your needs, all your yields, and then you can look at, okay, well, how do I get, if this is a need, is water, where do I get water from? So can I have a rain barrel? There's the house is right here. Can I place a rain barrel here or somewhere nearby so that that need can be met very easily? And then, so yeah, herbs might be a yield. So if I'm going to be using my fresh herbs in the kitchen, can I place this near the kitchen so that it's in close proximity, so that those yields are easy to feed into the need of what's happening in the kitchen. So you can do this for different elements in your design, and then that helps you kind of figure out how to place them on the property so that I'm getting something saying my internet connection is unstable. Could you hear all of that, Kelsey? Did I cut out for any of that?
You did actually cut out a little bit. I know my internet is a little unstable as well, so I thought it might just be me. I guess if you could repeat maybe just the last little bit, just in case. Thanks.
Sure. And somebody added, Michael added, human appreciation is a yield, I guess. Bad color choice. How do I change that? There, human appreciation. Yeah, so we want the needs of one system to be met by the yields from other parts of your system. And so when you've got your map and you've got your zones, and then you can kind of this will help lay things out so that you're not carting, so you've got a source of mulch nearby and you're not having to, get a machine to bring mulch in from the back of the property or something. And in urban areas, we have so many things that we could use outside of our property too. We have smaller properties, but we also have this huge resource around us. So like mulch, there's tree crews, that come all the time, either on a neighbor's property or on city property, and you can flag them down and say, hey, can you dump a load of mulch on my driveway? And they will very happily do that for you most of the time, because they have to pay to dispose of it or drive it off somewhere. And so in an urban area, looking at how you can meet some of those needs for your systems outside of your property, and where, collect your neighbor's compost if you need more compost, you're not producing enough, and ask them if they don't have a system set up, ask if you can come by once a week and pick up their compost and bring it back. Okay, so oops. I don't want to draw anymore. I just want to change the slide. Oh, yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, urban permaculture. So yeah, urban permaculture is permaculture is great for small space design. We're stacking functions on top of each other. So in a small space, you can have a lot of production by using permaculture techniques. So and there's also a large waste stream as a resource. Like I just said, I know people who go to some of their local coffee shops and collect buckets full of compost of coffee grinds from them and bring them home. I've also gotten burlap sacks from some of the local coffee roasters and used them in my garden, or used them for things around the house. So tapping into that waste stream and trying to divert as much as you can from it, and not have to purchase things is great advantage of being in an urban area. There's lots of water harvesting opportunities. There's a lot of hard surfaces in urban areas. So using this can be great. I'm just going to see. Okay.
That last little bit that you said got a little choppy, so it may have been a little choppy for others too. If you can repeat that last sentence.
I think you're frozen, Kelsey. If you're trying to, sounds like you're trying to say something.
Oh, yeah, I was just mentioning that the last little bit that you said came out a little choppy for me. It might just be my internet, but.
You're still frozen, Kelsey. But
Oh.
I'll come back to you when I can hear you again.
Hi, Jessica, can you hear me now? Oh, you are muted. Your screen has disappeared.
Oh, there. Yeah. Well, I don't know what happened there. We lost the whole webinar. But is everybody back?
I still see everybody.
Yeah, 28 people. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, at the time I was just saying, oh, you were a bit choppy for me. Someone else commented that it was for them as well. Someone else said it was all clear. So may just be various internet connection issues. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody.
Okay. So just let me get my screen share set up again. Yeah, you need to give me host capabilities again.
No problem.
Oh, and I'll start recording again. Oh, and you need to record this time because you're the host.
Oh, I just made you the host now, okay. Though, so yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that was a commercial break. We're back in business.
Yeah. It's still saying my internet connection's unstable. Hopefully we don't lose everybody again. So yeah, there's lots of water harvesting opportunities. As I was saying, there's a lot of hard surfaces. There's roofs to collect off. If you're redoing any paving on your property, then I strongly suggest you direct it towards where you want the water to be on your property. You can harvest that as a resource instead of just sending it down into. I hate when I go to houses and they've got their downspouts are going directly into the ground. They're not going into the ground to recharge the groundwater. They're going into a big O pipe that's then just shooting it into the sewer or directly or shooting it off the property. There's a huge waste of resources, waste opportunity there. There's lots of different microclimates in urban areas. Against walls, fences, there's, you've got lots of wind protection already from things in some areas, but then you've also got stronger winds in some areas around high rises and downtown core. So there's opportunities around microclimates to plant different types of vegetation that prefers drier or wetter or colder or warmer or poor soil or good soil. There's human resources too. So we've done, I haven't done one in a couple of years, but permablitzes are something that are popular in the permaculture community where, and I've done this for a few design clients where I do the design for them, and then instead of just having me come and do the installation, we hold a permablitz, and so they provide food and drink for people, and then we have a crew of 5 to 10 people come and do the grunt work of getting everything in the ground and digging the swales and setting up the water catchment systems, and I'm looking at the wrong picture. Yeah, so you're using that free human labor, and then those laborers are learning and getting free education out of it, and free community building too. And so the reason I actually got, I mean, I before I started my permaculture business, I was an urban planner, and I got into urban planning because I see cities as really the most sustainable way of living on this planet if we can sort it out, and design them better than we are. Really, they're a very efficient way of living. And so anyways, sustainability led me to urban planning, and then urban planning led me to permaculture. And so I really strongly believe in urban permaculture, and that it's, you know, a lot of people have the dream of moving out into the country and buying a few acres. And my dream is to stay in the city and work with the land I have, and work with neighbors' lands and forage in public spaces. And there's so much opportunity here that yeah, I see that moving out of the city as being very isolating, actually, and losing some of those microclimates, losing that connection to community, and losing those human resources that you have around. There's a question about building a herb spiral. We will talk about herb spirals soon. Yeah. So any questions about what we've talked about so far?
I can mention I did email everybody the handout materials. So there's that sheet, or one document about sheet mulch, companion planting, and another kind of one with various resources in it. So you'll all have that in your inbox.
Okay. Yeah, so now we'll go over some practical techniques, like sheet mulching, herb spirals, companion planting, guilds, and food forests. And I'll talk about herb spirals in a little bit here and why you would want to do that. So I'll start this section out by saying that permaculture is a design system. It's a way of thinking about design and a way of approaching problems. So these are techniques that can be applied, but they're not a panacea. They're not going to solve all the problems. They're not necessarily going to apply to every situation. Sheet mulch works great on a small scale, but you know, if you're trying to turn an acre of land into a garden or a food forest, you're not going to sheet mulch it. It's just not a practical way of dealing with that quantity of land. So, you know, these techniques are good for if you have the materials lying around, if they're readily accessible, if you have the labor, you know, there's different things that are needed to do each of these things. And so it's like, so swales are used for water catchment in permaculture quite a bit. They're basically a ditch on contour. And some permaculture teachers talk a lot about swales, and usually they're from dry climates like Australia, where water catchment is very important. I had clients in Manitoba who took an online permaculture course with somebody who talked a lot about swales, and they really wanted swales on their property. The property they ended up purchasing was fully forested and had a very high water table already. We dug a pond, and the pond is now overflowing and has problems with flooding some of the land around it. So there was no reason to put in swales and take out trees in order to do so, and add more water to something that's filling up just fine from the groundwater. So the point of the story is that you need to apply the techniques where they make sense. Don't just be like, oh, I'm going to do permaculture, so I have to sheet mulch, or I need to put in a herb spiral. I know other permaculturists who really hate herb spirals because they think they're just this kitschy thing that people want to do, and then they think they're doing permaculture. Permaculture is much more than herb spirals, but herb spirals are a handy little way of applying some of the principles of permaculture. So I'll talk about them in a minute. So sheet mulching, we talked about, one of the earliest slides was about the soil food web and how important it is to have healthy soil. So most of us have been taught that when we want to take over land to grow something, and it's bare or it's got grass on it or something, that we need to rototill it. We need to remove all the grass and rototill it. Well, all those grass roots and all that grass has a lot of life in it, but also has a lot of nutrients in it. So digging that up and removing it off the site, you're actually harming the soil food web, because you're taking away some of that nutrients and life, that little layer of topsoil that's there. So sheet mulching is a way of smothering the grass and starting fresh, so that you have that open ground to plant, and then you're not competing with the grass roots, but you're keeping all that nutrients there, and you're enhancing the soil food web instead of damaging it. So like Kelsey said, there's a handout on sheet mulching, on kind of the bomb-proof sheet mulch. You don't need to do every single step in there. But what's important is that everything is well watered at every stage, and that you're using something to smother the grass. Typically we use cardboard or newspaper, and that's thick enough and overlapped well enough, with a few inches of overlap on everything, so that the grass can't, especially certain grasses are really good, like crabgrass, at sending out runners and finding its way up through those cracks. So we want to have really good coverage that'll kill and smother the grass, and return those nutrients to the soil rather than removing them from site. And then on top of that cardboard or newspaper, you're laying down soil or compost, or depending on how soon you want to use it, you would put some different things on top. If you want to plant in it right away, then you're probably going to want to have a bit of soil and compost, so that you have enough depth there to plant some seedlings and seeds. Ideally, you would be sheet mulching your area, 2 to 4 months ahead of when you're going to be planting in it, and then that allows everything to break down and die underneath, so that the grass isn't going to pop up through the holes that you're putting in it.
Perfect. Melanie just asked what time of year is best to start sheet mulching, and then added, i.e. fall or spring. So, yeah.
Okay, that must just be I'm not seeing that chat, but so yeah, if you do prep now, if you know areas that you want to take over in the spring, then now's a perfect time to sheet mulch it, and then it'll sit all winter, and by spring you'll just be able to dig your shovel in there and plant, and it'll be beautiful. Or prep it in the spring and then plant it in the fall. If like when I'm going in and doing prep, usually we're planting right away, so I'm putting in more a deeper layer of soil on top of the newspaper cardboard, so that we can plant in it. And you're going to put, actually, before you lay down your cardboard newspaper, you're going to plant any trees or shrubs if you can, because they'll need a bigger hole, and then you can just sheet mulch up around them, and then you can make sure they're at the right depth. Because once you've got all this stuff laid down, it's hard to kind of get in there and dig a hole properly. You just want to be planting small stuff on top of your sheet mulch. Any other questions about sheet mulching?
If you're looking for trees or shrubs, Reforest London is currently giving some away for free.
Great.
Yeah, we're doing contactless pickups where you have a reserved time where you can come and pick it up. So even with the new requirements of only 25 people outside, we'll still meet those, no problem. You'll just drive up in your car and we put it next to your car. So they're running out quickly. I still think there's some left though. So you can go to reforestlondon.ca if you want to get a free tree.
Great.
I don't see any questions. Okay. Go ahead.
So herb spirals. So why build a herb spiral? Shan asked. Herb spirals are a really good use of space. They're taking that spiral pattern, and you have a very large amount of growing space in a sort of a 5-foot wide area. You have all this vertical growing space, and that, like, laid out in a row, would go to the end of your garden, or go whatever 20-30 feet or something, but instead you're spiraling it up, so it doesn't take up much land. I don't have one at my current house because I have garden beds just outside with some small fruit trees that I'm espaliering, and I've got my herbs around the base of them. So it is just outside my kitchen door, but I didn't need a herb spiral here. At our old house, we did have a herb spiral, and we actually had it. There was a concrete area outside the kitchen door that was superfluous. We didn't need it for anything. It was kind of ugly too. So we just actually built the herb spiral on top of that. We didn't remove the concrete or anything. We just built it there, and it was right outside the door. It was super easy to go harvest things while I was cooking in the kitchen there. And then you have the advantage of all these different microclimates as well. So at the top of your herb spiral, it's hot and it's dry. And so the plants that are going to thrive there are going to be different than the ones that are down on the north side of it, down at the bottom where it's shadier and a bit wetter. And sorry, I'm just trying to find the file here. Yeah, so you've got different microclimates happening. On your top sunny parts, you'll have oil-rich herbs like thyme, sage, rosemary, basil, lavender, if you want that in your herb spiral. And then on the moister, more shady sides, things more foliage, green foliage kind of plants like mint and parsley and chives and coriander. They don't need quite as much sun. And then you can also run a pipe right down the middle of the herb spiral that allows you to water deeply inside it. We never got around to it before we moved from our old place, but I was actually going to set up, have a rain barrel there. There was a downspout. I wanted to have the overflow from the rain barrel going into the center of the herb spiral and watering it automatically for me. But then we moved, so I never got that finalized. And so, yeah, you can use rocks. I've built them with fieldstone. I've built them with reclaimed bricks. I've built them with wood. And so, but the idea of permaculture is use what you have on hand. So if you have excess material lying around your property, use that. Or if your neighbor is getting rid of, some old bricks, then use those. Try and use what you have at hand instead of purchasing something. And they can be quite aesthetically pleasing too. I have one client who they are art collectors, and they've got all sorts of cool little knickknacks. And they also, one of them does sells like little antique thingies and curated stuff, and so they have all sorts of cool collectibles around their yard, and they had some in their herb spiral that really made it quite interesting to look at. So companion planting is a lot of you have probably heard of companion planting before. It's a way of pairing up plants so that they help support each other. And so, people typically know about having marigolds near your tomatoes to help repel pests. It actually has to be, there's kind of perithrium daisy is really what you want. Most marigolds don't have enough perithrium in them to be strong enough to repel pests, but it's a bit of an old wives' tale that'll work. It can work, but you need marigolds that have a higher amount of perithrium than most of the ornamental ones we have available today. But there are, like, basil and tomatoes do really well together. Actually having, sorry, I'll back up. There's different kinds of companion planting. So it's there can be a sharing of physical space. So that can be above ground, but also root space. So celery and beets, for example, grow well together because of their one has a shallow root system and is more above ground, and then beets have a bigger underground root. The three sisters that were planted by Indigenous peoples in this area, the corn, beans, and squash, share space really well. The corn grows up, and then the bean uses that as something to climb and get up into the sun, and then the squash smothers any weeds in between the corn and covers the ground. So they're great at using physical space astutely. And then another form of companion planting is having trap plants. So planting specific things that are going to, like mustard, to attract cabbage worms away from your cruciferous vegetables and your more prized plants. You can use repelling or disguising plants. So pretty much around every fruit tree I plant, I have herbs and something from the allium family, like chives, garlic chives, Egyptian walking onion, regular garlic, whatever, something from the allium family. Even ornamental allium bulbs can help. But so something that will either repel pests, like that's because it's strong smelling, or it disguises the plant. So if it's very strong smelling, maybe the apple maggots flying along and it smells apples, and then all it can smell is mint and it can't find the apple anymore. And so it's helping hide your plants that you want to keep. Chemical and biological boosters actually can enhance the growth of each other. So some things can interfere with the growth of each other, like beans don't like being grown with allium family around, like onions and garlic. Tomatoes seem to do better when they're planted with parsley or chives nearby. And then there's alley cropping is taking it a little bit further, where you've got nitrogen fixing shrubs or small trees along the edges of veggie crops, and these can help bring nutrients down into the soil for your vegetables and stuff.
If you're done there, Melanie had a question going back to the herb spiral topic. So if you have an area about 5 feet, what's the average height with the kinds of plants that you would grow? So a herb spiral, to be able to reach the middle of it, you want like a 5 foot maximum diameter for your herb spiral, and then the height is probably like 4 to 5 feet high would be how tall it is. Any other questions? A resource list for companion planting. I see. Yeah, yes, the resources that were sent out. There is a page on companion planting, and it has some charts and stuff in it. There's also lots of, if you look online, you'll find lots of information about companion planting. I'll talk about guilds next, unless there's any more questions about companion planting. Guilds basically take companion planting to the next level and are working with more perennial plants than companion planting. I think of as more for veggies and annuals, and guilds I think of as perennial food systems. So a guild. A guild takes the same ideas as companion planting, but again, we're working with perennials. So in building a guild, you might have, usually there's a central element, so a fruit tree or a nut tree or a fruit-bearing shrub. And then around that, you have things to keep the grass out. Bulbs, a ring of bulbs around can be good at that. In the picture here, there's a row of garlic. This is at a place called the Living Centre. If you're in the London area, if you're in the London area, the Living Centre is a beautiful place to visit. I'm not sure what they're doing with COVID right now for visitors, but they teach a variety of workshops on permaculture and spiritual connections to the earth and your plants, and herb walks. Chantry's a herbalist, so
and works with a lot of native plants. But so this is a picture of one of their early guilds, a young guild there, and they would move that ring of garlic out a little bit every year and reclaim some of the grass space, and then add some more plants into the inner part of the ring. Insect and bird attractors, so you want things that are going to bring in predatory. Obviously you don't want bad insects, but you want predatory insects that are going to keep your pests under control. And so you can do that by creating habitat nooks. Number 7, you can do that by having piles of rocks around, or hollow stemmed plants, or I've drilled holes into logs before and left them around for solitary wasps to nest in. And yeah, so especially herbs for attracting beneficial insects. Plants that have herbs are great. Things like dill and fennel, coriander, wild carrot that have those umbelliferous flowers that are like a big umbrella and with lots of tiny little flowers in the middle. Those are always, anything that looks like that kind of flower is good to have around. And then having some flowering shrubs nearby to attract birds is good for insect control. One thing we talk about more in the fruit tree care workshop, but if you have a healthy tree, if you have a healthy plant with a healthy immune system, then pests, insect pests will not bother it, because they can't actually digest the complete proteins that it's producing. They actually will only eat unhealthy plants. So if you have an insect problem, you can certainly, if it's a big problem, you can try and deal with that insect pest, but really the root of the problem is that your plant is not healthy and doesn't have a strong immune system, and so it's not producing complete proteins. And then it will be bothered by pest insects. Yeah, you can also add mulch plants around. So things like comfrey or artichoke or rhubarb, clovers, nasturtium, something that has big leaves and produces a lot of mass and doesn't mind being cut back. And then you can cut them back once or twice a year, and just instead of carting that away and composting somewhere else, it's about meeting that needs and yields right on site. So one of the needs of a guild is of a tree is to have mulch around it. And so if you just plant that mulch right there, plant things that you can cut back, we call it chop and drop. So you chop and drop a couple times a year. And if those mulch plants are dynamic accumulators or nitrogen fixers and able to drop certain nutrients from the soil, it's even better, because then you're just helping return that, keep that nutrients in cycle on site. So there we go, nutrient accumulators. They're also called dynamic accumulators sometimes. So things like yarrow, there's a lot of weeds that are great nutrient accumulators, like chicory and dandelion and plantain. Comfrey is a nutrient accumulator as well. And then nitrogen fixers, there's smaller stuff like clover and alfalfa. Lupins are a beautiful nitrogen fixer. Vetch, there's larger shrubs, like some native ones would be New Jersey tea or sweet gale. And so having them nearby as well, and then taking whatever leaf matter from that or green matter and laying it back on the soil as mulch, and then returning that nitrogen to the soil. And habitat nooks I talked about already too. And those don't need to be right under the tree, but somewhere on the property, so that you have that diversity. And there's different ways, like to build guilds. You can look at native plant communities. So if you look at, so an apple is in the Rosaceae family, and so looking at what would be growing near them in wild spaces. There are wild apples, what grows around them, and then finding comparable plants to those, but that are more useful to your needs, and substituting those in your guild. And every plant that you have in your guild is going to have interactions with every other plant in the guild. So if you're experimenting with new plants, then you just want to introduce one or two at a time and not suddenly throw a whole bunch around the plant, because then there's all these other interactions and you can't necessarily determine what's working and what isn't. So questions about guilds before we move on to food forests? Okay. So a food forest is kind of a collection of guilds. A food forest doesn't mean that you're going into a forest and then adding food plants. A food forest is very specifically designed with production in mind. And so in a natural forest, there are 7 layers. And so in our food forest, to mimic succession, like we talked about earlier in the presentation, we want to have those 7 layers so that it's a complete system and it's not trying to bring in more plants to make it more complex and a higher level of succession. So we have the overstory is the highest level, the taller trees, the understory, shrub layer, and then we have the herbaceous layer is like ground level plants that are going to die back every year to their roots. And then there's a root layer as root crops. And then there's a vine layer as well you can have growing up the overstory or understory plants. And then the mycelium is the fungal network that is super important to the soil food web and the soil biology, but also to the trees. Like the sharing of nutrients that happens through those fungal networks is really interesting and critical to a healthy system. So a food forest uses that vertical space and horizontal space, but also temporal space. So having things that are coming into production over the course of the year. So that's something I always, depending on what the needs of my client are. Like I've had one client, she's Canadian and he's Swedish. And so they're always back in, typically they're gone for 3 months of the summer. So they need stuff that's ready before they leave and after they come back. Other people maybe they're homesteading and they want stuff to be a little bit to be ready at all times of year, so they're not overwhelmed with a huge harvest at one time of year. So it depends on what your needs are, but you can certainly design that into your system of having things produce when it's convenient for you, basically. And you can do it. So this is again at the Living Center where these are all separate guilds that are slowly getting larger each year and will eventually kind of grow into each other into this food forest. So that's one way of doing it. So there's also, we talk about 7 layers, there's also 7 yields from a food forest. And I talked about different yields a bit before. Let me see if I can remember all of them. They don't all start with F, but we joke that they do. So food, pharmaceuticals, forage, fodder, fuel, fun, and what's the other one? Fiber. So you can be making rope or clothing or, anyway, so those are, most people are going to be interested in food and medicine, food and pharmaceuticals, but there are a lot of other things that you can design into your system as well. I've also had a client who was making her own dyes and stuff. And so we tried to incorporate dye plants into their design. Oh, oops, I didn't update that slide. The only upcoming event is October 3rd is the full day permaculture workshop that we're hopefully going to do in person at the new Westminster Pond Learning Center. And that will depend on COVID on how many people and where exactly and how we're doing it. Are there any questions about food forests or about anything else in the presentation that we've gone over?
So Melanie says, the guild circle has a central element and other plants around in concentric circles. How do you choose what goes as the central element?
Well, the central element is what you, is typically like a bigger plant or your main plant, like what your main harvest plant would be. So like a pear tree or an apple tree or a hazelnut or something that you wanting to get a yield from that you're planting there purposely. And then the guild plant, the guild is there to support that plant. So you're still getting some yield out of the guild. There are still, you can be using the herbs in there, you can be harvesting some of it as food or as medicine, but its primary function is to support that main plant. So the central element is whatever your most important plants are in your system.
Have you had any experience with straw bale gardening?
I have not tried it myself. My first permaculture teacher ever, actually, Ron Berezin in Edmonton. He now lives on the Sunshine Coast, but he was trying out some straw bale gardening when I took my first course with him. And I know when I was at the community garden at Thames Park, there was somebody doing it. It was pretty stinky. I think there can be mixed results. Yeah. I mean, if you have straw bales in excess and you are trying to find a use for them, then I don't see why you wouldn't try it out. But to go and purchase bales and drive them somewhere and then purchase the materials to put inside, like, because you need to dig little pockets, and then you need to spray them with certain nutrients over the course of the year to help them break down and release their nutrients and add things that are missing from the system. So it seems like there's a fair bit of inputs for them, and they can be kind of stinky. So yeah, I'd say if you have excess resources that you're trying to get rid of, then you could try it out. But from what I've seen, I wouldn't be like going out to find what I need to do it and buy inputs.
Okay, if the central element has all these plantings around it, how do you accommodate needing to access the tree? So do you design in a path of some kind to get to your tree?
Right, good question. So yeah, typically you don't want stuff right up around the trunk. I mean, usually I say to leave like a foot or two of space where it's just mulch around the tree. Honestly, my herbs creep in closer than that, and I let them. But you do need to have room for harvest. So you don't want to have things that are too precious that you can't step on them. I mean, if I step on my comfrey's pretty big and I can't always step around it, you need to, it'll get crushed sometimes, and then it just becomes mulch. So I don't worry about it. I don't really leave distinct paths, but my herbs to me are fair game to step on. And maybe not my flowers, but yeah, a lot of the stuff that's around there, I just trot on as needed for harvesting or pruning or whatever.
Okay, can a guild be built around a young, already existing red maple tree? What would work well with the shallow roots of the maple tree and eventual large canopy?
Good question. Sure. Yes, you can definitely put a guild around an existing tree. If the tree is already, well established and healthy, I guess you're saying it's a young tree. I'll just expand the question a little bit to talk about a mature tree. You can certainly put plants around a mature tree to help it out, but if it's already big and healthy, it doesn't need that much help. I would focus mostly on nitrogen fixers and dynamic accumulators. But I mean, a maple isn't going to have the same kind of pests. Like, you don't need to worry about the herbs and the alliums as much, because it's not going to have the same pest problems as a fruit tree. I would plant under a maple, I would plant a lot of native plants, like native shade plants. And that's a good question. Things change too over time. So a young fruit tree or a young maple tree is going to have a lot of sun around it. But as that tree gets bigger, there might be a lot of shade under it. And so then you might need to transition some of the plants out of that guild into things like wild ginger or mayapple or bloodroot, or something that can tolerate the shade and still support pollinators and produce food or medicine for you. Yeah.
Okay, the next one. I have an oil pipeline nearby and I'm worried it may affect my yield. What are your thoughts on soil quality testing and the yield being affected? Do you have any experience with a garden adjacent to a line like that?
Right. I mean, I don't think the oil pipeline should affect your yield necessarily. If there's ever a leak in it, I wouldn't be eating the things around there. But if the pipeline's sealed, it shouldn't be a problem, unless I guess I don't know a lot about how when they install it, what they do around it. But if you wanted to do some soil testing, it's really not that expensive. And there's A&L Laboratories in London is good for they can test for any petrochemicals or heavy metals and things like that. And they'll test your nutrient levels, your micronutrients and macronutrients. If you want to get your soil food web tested and know kind of how healthy your soil is in terms of the life that's in it, I have a colleague, Dr. Let's see if I can annotate. Here we go. They're called Dr. and she's in Quebec, but you can ship a soil sample to her, and she'll look under a microscope at all the organisms living in your soil and tell you whether it's a healthy, balanced system or not, and how many nematodes and bacteria and fungus you have, and then make recommendations on how to improve it.
That's great. I don't see any other questions at the moment. No, I guess we'll give it another minute in case anybody else has any other questions, but I guess that's about it for the presentation. Oh, there we go. We do have another one.
Yes.
Are you in London, Canada? Yes.
Yes, London, Ontario. If you're in London, if you're in the big London, we're little London. If you're in big London, I'm sure there are testing facilities around there too. Just look up soil testing. Oh, right, Hove, England, right. Yeah, so just look up soil testing. They'll do agriculture. I'm sure there's agricultural soil testing available around where you live. In terms of soil food web stuff, I'm not so sure, but I know there's a very thriving permaculture community in the UK. So if you tap into that network, they'll be able to point you towards people who do soil food web analysis.
Oh, a question just came in. Hello, I plan on sheet mulching and putting native wildflower seeds on top of the mulch to germinate in the spring. Would that work?
Yeah, that, I mean, yeah, native plants need to go through a stratification period. So rather than putting them in your fridge and then planting them in the spring, I don't know, I don't do a lot of seed starting myself. So I would look into the specific seeds in that mix, or if you're buying a mix from a native wholesaler, then I would ask them that question. But I would say that most wildflower seeds need that stratification period. So that's a great strategy, just to put them out there and then cover them with a little bit of soil and let them stratify them naturally over the winter, and then they should come up in the spring. The only thing I'd say about, so wild native plants, typically they don't, it's not only that they don't need the deep, rich soil that we want to create for garden beds, like for vegetable beds. Sometimes they actually do better in poorer soil. So I wouldn't be putting too much compost in. If your bed is going to be for native plants exclusively, don't be putting in a heavy compost load, like really more sand and sandy, like heavier native soil is going to be better for native plants.
Okay, I realized I skipped over a question that came in just before. In permaculture, how do you put a garden to bed for the winter? What kind of cleanup, if any?
Good question. Really, I don't do much cleanup. I mean, I might take out some like dead, I was just doing some pruning of some dead branches today. But if you're trying to encourage diversity, biodiversity in your system, then there's a lot of insects that overwinter in the leaf litter on the ground and in the soil and in hollow stemmed plants. I don't really I try not to cut anything back until actually the end of May, because there's still stuff, the insects are still emerging in May, even though we might have some really nice warm days. If you start clearing all that, all those stems and brush away, then you're killing them before they have a chance to emerge. So permaculture is for lazy gardeners like me. You don't have to do too much. One thing I do, so for my fruit trees, I do a holistic spray, which is a whole other course that we do with the fruit and nut tree care workshop. I do a holistic spray and before the winter, and then put some compost down around once they've lost 50% of their leaves. And I harvest stuff that I want to dry for teas and tinctures and medicine over the winter.
Yeah, speaking of protecting the insects, I know there's been some popular memes about not mowing down your dandelions in the spring. I think that was pretty popular because it helps some of the earliest pollinators. I think that's something I've seen. Not sure if that's true. All right, Leslie says, thank you. And I have a new to me garden, and the guild information is perfect. I've already put in some elderberries and we'll be getting things established for that spot. Any suggestions for what to do with elderberries?
Yeah, elderberries are a native plant, so they're pretty well balanced with the ecosystem. I would complement them with native plants around. Some alliums, there's lots of different native, there's wild garlic, nodding wild onion, there's ramps, there's a few different kinds of native alliums, and they're all edible for us too. So I would maybe put some of those around your elderberry, and then some ground cover like wild ginger, wild geranium. They're native as well, and can be good mulch plants, and also can be harvested. Not the geranium, but the wild ginger can.
Okay, Melanie asks, will this be covered again in the one-day October 3rd meeting, or will it start where we left off? So if some of these folks want to join us, what can we do?
So some of it will be repeated, but we'll be going more in depth into things. And I'll be co-teaching. Well, the last time I was co-teaching with Michael Schimpf from 3 Acre Permaculture, and so he has a different approach to things sometimes, and he's rural, so he has that perspective as well. But because of COVID, we might have to split up into 2 groups. And so he would teach half the group and I would teach half the group. So then I would suggest, if you've taken this workshop, then go with Michael's group so that you get his take on things.
Yeah, right now we have 17 people signed up. So I think we may have to limit it to 20 people so that if we had to move indoors, if there was bad weather, we could have 2 groups of, I guess it'll have to be 9 and 9 with the 2 leaders. So right. There may only be about 1 spot left at the moment. Actually, I'll reach out to, because some people signed up way in advance. So I think I'll reconfirm, just because these spots are pretty precious. So I'll reach out to people to confirm if they're still coming, and then maybe that'll free up a few more spots, but we'll see.
Yeah. And all these courses will be offered again next year as well. So, and there's online permaculture courses that you can, if you're really interested and you want to take a 2-week permaculture course, Michael teaches a 2-week permaculture course, and the Living Center does as well. And then there's some online ones too, but those are the 2 that are local to London, Ontario.
Okay. Yeah, Michael says he's interested, but I believe you're in the UK. So these ones are exclusively in person for the full day, just because the full day would be tough on a webinar. So unfortunately, there's that. And then Tamara says, I have an apple tree hit hard by tent caterpillars. Is there anything I can do to help it recover?
Yeah, do holistic sprays on it. Take the course in the spring. Yeah, the tent caterpillars went after that tree because it wasn't very healthy and strong to begin with. So the first thing I would do is once it loses 50% of its leaves and it's dormant, if you put on compost too early right now, it's going to slow its dormancy. And then it might get damaged with the cold weather. So you want it to keep dozing off to sleep right now, but just after it's kind of reached that peak where you're not going to start a little awake with too much nutrition, then you want to put some compost down around it and get the best quality stuff you can get. Like if you can get worm castings, they're very expensive and precious, but that's like the creme de la creme of compost, is worm castings, vermicompost. I would put that around, and then there's also some products that you can, where's my resource list? I just need to, there's the company's split into 2 now, but it was called Earth Alive, but there's one called, I think it's in the resource handout that I sent you, but there's one called Root Rescue, which is a mycorrhizal inoculant. And it's water soluble, so you can mix that in with water, and I would apply some now in the fall, and then also apply some in the spring, and get that soil biology working well. So yeah, Root Rescue for the mycorrhizal inoculant, and then they have another one called I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's a soil activator, I think it's called, and it's a bacterial inoculant. So I would add both of those things in this fall, and then again in the spring, to kick that, to boost that soil food web, and make sure you've got active life in there to help your tree.
Hey, Laurel says, I have a Norway maple in bad shape with a fungus, lost leaves early, it's almost bare. I've had deep root feeding recommended. And what do you think of that? And maybe, do you have any other ideas?
Mm-hmm. Well, Norway maples aren't native, and they're not really trees. I would say if it doesn't make it, then it's a great opportunity. Turn the problem into a solution. If it doesn't do well next year, then turn that problem into a great opportunity to plant a native tree or a fruit tree or something like that. If it's also hard if you've got a big mature tree and it's producing shade. It's hard to lose that. We have a big, I tap our Norway maple and we get syrup from it, and it's a nice mature tree, and I want to put a tree fort in it. So I'm not going to cut mine down, but so yeah, the deep root feeding that tree companies do, I don't know a lot about it, but I think it's generally it's like it's like using synthetic fertilizer versus compost. So synthetic fertilizer doesn't have nitrogen in the most readily available form for the plant, and it's kind of like being on an IV drip rather than eating real food. So it's not going to harm the tree, but maybe do that in conjunction with some things like a really good quality compost, and feeding that soil food web with the bacterial and fungal inoculants, so that you have that sustained life in the soil that's constantly regenerating the nutrients and getting that fungal network spreading out and drawing in nutrients from far away. The deep root feeding that they inject in there is not going to be a long-term solution. So you might need it to kind of kickstart the process and give it an energy boost. But I would do some things that are more long-term health of the soil and the tree.
Yeah, Norway maples are a huge issue in London, but at the same time, yeah, they still have those benefits. So it's hard to take down a tree when it's mature. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of funny that I know those tar spots are really bad, particularly on that species. So luckily they're not too bad on the native trees. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Is moss under a fruit tree's canopy a problem in any way?
Not that I know of. I mean, to me, moss is a sign that it's a pretty that it's probably fairly moist, which is good. But and that it's kind of stable too. So like it's not being trodden on or disturbed too much. Moss doesn't grow in areas that have a lot of traffic, so I don't think it's a problem.
All right, well, it's a good thing that you ended the first part of the presentation with time to spare, since it's been good just for all kinds of general tree care and plant care questions. So that's great. Mm-hmm. Hopefully everyone had the chance to ask their questions. If you didn't, or you just think of something after the fact, obviously you see the emails up on the screen there, so you can always reach out. And I'll be in touch after this with the recording, and I'll send the attachments again, but I've already sent them out at the beginning of this presentation. And so you'll have my contact information through that as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm seeing some thank you messages come in. No more questions though. So there's about 1 more minute, but yeah, in the meantime, just yeah, thanks so much for coming, and hopefully you can come to the next one. And have a great day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.